Welcome to the Michael Paris podcast, a place where I interview those making the difference, pushing life forward through the wonders of science. As well, a place where I think out loud, sharing the topics that matter with those who want to listen. Here, I journalize my scientific adventures. Although I'm incredibly sleep deprived and recovering from a really bad sore throat, I'm not dissuaded from creating my very first podcast. I got coffee in one hand and cough syrup in the other hand, ready to get started. I do want to mention for those who have been following me, I've released my podcast website over a month ago, yet I'm only now finally coming around to my first episode. And most importantly, I've truly underestimated the amount of due diligence required to create a podcast, especially those covering such a broad range in science. As much as I feel comfortable discussing the selected topics, this experience is certainly something new. For every podcast I create, I condense all information, definition, terminologies that pertain to the topic being discussed, and organize them on my website. I recommend you take a visit, head to the respective episode, and scroll to the preface section. Read up before listening to an episode. I will often dig deep on topics, and being acquainted early will certainly have its merits. Furthermore, you should definitely keep in the loop and follow me on social media. My Instagram is @mike.514, Twitter @Mikey Perez, Facebook @the Michael Paris. If you'd like to support this podcast, even a cup of coffee can go a long way, and certainly would be appreciated. You can support me on Patreon by clicking the link clearly visible on my website. Although I'd initially intended for this topic to reserve no more than one episode, I've quickly come to the realization that I grossly underestimated the amount of content this topic would contain. A single episode would certainly not suffice. I've decided to break this topic up into at least 3 independent segments. It's all truly fascinating stuff, and there's so much to discuss. This first episode will not cover any propositions to the Fermi Paradox, but rather some key introductory concepts. Worry not, if this is done right, this episode should be more than interesting enough. Alright, without further ado, the Michael Paris podcast, the Fermi Paradox, Introductory Concepts. Murphy's Law. Wikipedia interprets this as, what can go wrong will go wrong. Although that technically is correct and likely refers to most relevant cases, a more abstract definition appeals. What can happen will happen. As obvious and logical as such a statement may seem, it sheds some light on some less intuitive thoughts. Murphy's point was, if an event has a probability greater than 0, given enough of some variable, in this context time, that event will occur. The probabilistic weight does not particularly have much meaning in this context. What can happen, regardless of likelihood, will happen, given enough time. Our finite minds have difficulty grasping the magnitude of influence certain properties can have on a system. Biological evolution is a great example. Such a simplistic mechanism, given enough time, can yield astounding results. The Anthropic Principle. The Anthropic Principle states, in order for the universe to be acknowledged, it requires the conditions for you to exist so that you can acknowledge it. Let's derive a thought on the premise of this principle. Some may use the wonders of our planet as an argument for a higher power, intelligent designer, or some entity operating beyond the confines of physics. This universe is a vast ocean of probability, and the process of creating something as wondrous as life can happen, given 10 to the power of 24 estimated planets and a time frame of 14 billion years. Again, 10 to the power of 24 potential planets to harbor life. That's a 1, followed by 24 zeros. Write that down on a piece of paper and let that thought detonate in your brain. This doesn't even include exomoons, exodwarf planets, and countless other celestial bodies. For all those countless outcomes in which planets do not contain the conditions for life, life never forms, and we're never there to make that observation. Think about it. Just because we exist within a favorable outcome, and are therefore capable of observing the wonders of this planet, does not serve credence to an explanation that's beyond rationale. It's quite important we see the bigger picture. Otherwise, we can be tempted to come to conclusions devoid of logical substance. Let's expand on this thought, and use a typical lottery game to serve as an analogy. Your probability of winning a lottery is 1 in 175 million. An average of 30 million people play this game, and let's just assume for the simplicity of this analogy, only one person wins a lottery at any given game. The one who does have the favorable outcome of winning may have a very difficult time grasping how an event of such small probability and such powerful impact is nothing more than the product of sheer coincidence. Especially if just yesterday this guy's doctor told him that his mother was dying of cancer and that she had to undergo a life-saving treatment that he simply couldn't afford. What are the odds, he may ask? When all seemed hopeless, someone made the impossible possible. In truth, it's just as likely that any one of the 30 million participants could have equally won the lottery, with some sort of hardship in their life that winning made their reality seem also wondrous, and they too would grapple with the same reality. There will always be a reality where someone is the winner, and someone is asking these very same questions. A good litmus test for recognizing if bias is present would be to ask, would we come to the opposite conclusion if the same conditions would present themselves and we didn't have a favorable outcome? That is to say, do we observe all experiences with the same logical lens, or do we only choose to do so when the conclusions favor a desired narrative? Now, there are 10 to the 24 planets in this universe. Within this set of planets, there are a subset of planets that contain the potential for sustaining life. Within this subset, there are an even smaller subset, which contain planets with conscious observers. The probability of our planet being one of such subsets is truly something special. Every one of these intelligent conscious observers will look into the stars and come to that same conclusion. But what weight does such an argument hold if there will always be someone asking the question? More importantly, what weight does the argument hold when we can only ask the question when there is a favorable outcome? Say, if Earth just missed it for whatever reason, we would have never been there to acknowledge the opposite conclusion. Now, here's a million-dollar question. If we had enough information whereby we can generate a value which objectively represents the probability of life originating on a celestial body, would that probability say that we are special, or that we are nothing but a grain of sand in a universe of oceans? That is, do we have enough of time and space so that such a probability can reasonably express itself? And if you really think about it, that's the only question we're really asking. This question becomes so much more difficult to answer when we're missing enough data to properly define the statistic. It's akin to flipping a coin 3 times, getting heads every time, and trying to use this data to determine that the probability of a coin toss is in fact 50-50. And it's this sort of complexity that lies at the core of every scientist's profession. They observe the result, often with limited data, and are forced to reverse engineer the process and determine what the rules of nature actually are. Alright, moving on. The SETI Institute. The SETI Institute is a not-for-profit research organization whose mission is to explore, understand, and explain the origin of life in the universe. It aims for discovering and sharing knowledge as scientific ambassadors to the public, the press, and the government. SETI stands for Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. This institute consists of 3 primary centers: the Carl Sagan Center, devoted to the study of life in the universe; the Center of Education, focused on astronomy, astrobiology, and space science; and the Center for Public Outreach, producing the Institute's general science radio show and podcast; and SETI Talks, a weekly colloquium series. Seth Shostak, someone who I'm a great fan of, is the host of this radio show, and we'll be discussing his views from time to time. The Drake equation. The Drake equation is an attempt to encapsulate all the variables that would be relevant to establishing the number of intelligent civilizations that exist in the Milky Way galaxy, and which are broadcasting radio signals at this particular point in time. The variables which define the Drake equation can be seen in the preface section of this podcast. However, the Drake equation is based on variables that contain a strong degree of statistical uncertainty. I, like many others, are not convinced the equation's results represent reality with any meaningful weight. Nevertheless, it's worthy of being mentioned in this podcast due to its popularity, and will be brought up when discussing the Fermi Paradox. The Copernican Principle. Scientist Nicholas Copernicus recognized that the Earth is not in any particularly privileged position in the solar system. This elegant fact can be extended to encompass a powerful idea known as the Copernican Principle. This principle states that we are not in any special or favorable place of any sort. By looking at the world through the eyes of this principle, we can remove certain blinders and preconceptions about ourselves and better examine our relationship with the universe. The Principle Mediocrity. The principle of mediocrity remains largely a matter of opinion, but has been bolstered by the discovery of extrasolar planets and certain organic chemicals, such as amino acids, the essential building blocks of life, which are commonly found throughout space and even within our solar system. The Mediocrity Principle. The Mediocrity Principle states that our evolution, biological and technological, as well as our surroundings, including the Earth and the Sun, are typical rather than exceptional. This principle is often invoked to support the claim that life and intelligence occur commonly throughout the universe. It is also an implicit assumption in SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, that other beings exist who wish to communicate and are technologically compatible with us to make communication possible. The principle of mediocrity remains largely a matter of opinion, but has been bolstered by the discovery of extrasolar planets and certain organic chemicals, such as amino acids, the essential building blocks of life which are common throughout space, and even within our solar system. The Uniformity Principle. The Uniformity Principle asserts that the laws of nature discovered on Earth apply throughout the rest of the universe. From this it is reasonable, though not an inevitable conclusion, that the same physical, chemical, and biological processes that gave rise to terrestrial life could also produce life elsewhere. The principle of uniformity is a fundamental tenet of science and is used by most SETI proponents to argue that life and intelligence are not uncommon throughout space. The Kardashev Scale. This scale was originally designed in 1964 by the Russian astrophysicist Nikolai Kardashev, who at the time was looking for signs of extraterrestrial life within cosmic signals. The Kardashev Scale is a method of measuring a civilization's level of technological advancement based on the amount of energy a civilization is able to harness for communication. A Type 1 civilization, also known as a planetary civilization, is one that can harness all of the energy which reaches its planet from its parent star. A Type 2 civilization, known as a stellar civilization, is one that can harness the total energy of its planet's parent star, the most popular hypothetical concept being the Dyson sphere, a device which can encompass the energy of an entire star and transfer that energy to a planet. It's fair to say there have been proposals for creating a Dyson sphere, but such a conversation strictly remains within the realm of science fiction. A Type 3 civilization, known as a galactic civilization, is one that can harness the energy of its entire host galaxy. A civilization of this sort would appear nothing short of godlike to us. At our current state of technological advancement, discussing such a civilization would be pretty meaningless. This concludes this episode, and the introductory concepts needed for the episodes of the Fermi Paradox that follow. If you have any questions, don't hold back. You can email them to me or have at it at the comment section of this episode's respective YouTube video. Don't forget to stay in the loop and follow me on social media. My Instagram is @mike.514. My Twitter is @MikeyPerez, and my Facebook is @TheMichaelPerez. For those who want to support this podcast, it would certainly be appreciated. My Patreon account can be found at the right-hand side of my website. Till next time.